Okay, so as with, can you all see my screen now? Yep, great.
Yes.
So as with just about everything here, the service listener starts with the dApp, and the goal of the service listener is to hear when the not fully prepared here. The goal of the service listener is to hear when there's an update to the to one of the contracts or new contract is created, and then the API gets that update in the background. So you can see in Postman here that right at the moment we have 11 API records on the contracts endpoint. We're using the dev API. And so what I'm going to do is start up the service listener, and I'll show you kind of how that links in, and then I can show you the code real briefly. So the service listener can be started local truffle environment with just an npm start, or with a provider environment variable that tells you where to connect. So I'm connecting to the Rinkeby node that Robert set up for us to develop on here. And once you go ahead and connect, there is actually a daemon command as well to start this in the background. But you'll see here that what it does is subscribe to each of the APIs, and then runs through and sets up several event listeners to notice when different things happen to the contracts. So if I go back over to the dApp here and create a new contract, which I'm going to do on extremely fast mode, so hopefully we'll get it nice and quick. Go confirm MetaMask. So our contract is deploying there. And you'll see as soon as it completes that deploy, there we go. There's a whole bunch of information here. Now, this log is not quite as verbose when you're not in development mode. There is some additional debug logging that comes out, all this kind of the data there. Particularly, we don't need to be outputting the exact function in our production logs. But what happens is it notices an event that it's listening for, and we can see what event that was right here. It prints out the event information, and it goes down and kind of normalizes that for the API. It uses the get contract metadata function that Phil was talking about earlier, and then posts that up to the API. So if I go ahead and refresh this here, we'll see we now have a new contract number 12 in here. And that will go ahead and update this record if we have any information coming back. And so right at the moment, there's a number of update hooks. These are the different events that we listen to. And there's update hooks, and then removal hooks, and delete hook. And one thing I do want to note is that there's this attribute called is whitelisted that goes into the API. And if that is true, then the contract is considered to be active in the API. And if it's false, then it's considered to be soft deleted. And there was a little bit of back and forth with Travis last week about putting that into that get contract metadata function, and we ultimately decided not to because it seemed like it was going to be very, very difficult and intensive to add it right there. And it's really kind of a contextual attribute here for us, soft delete. Have we fired this removed event? So in the code, what's happening, thank you all for encouraging me to learn TypeScript for the first time. I'm enjoying it, sort of, and not enjoying it in other ways, but it was good to know at least. So I got this all TypeScripted up here, and so eventually, essentially what's happening is there's a wrapper around market.js called market interface, which just kind of handles making that a little bit cleaner for the application itself, and spawning up the Market.js instance as the endpoint for Web3 changes or is interacted with. And then these listeners get applied. You can see these are created. There's actually a generator that creates the listener with the Market.js instance, and then goes ahead and handles all that output. And here's where all that stuff was happening, that debug. So it's pretty simple. If we wanted to add more listeners here, we could simply hook into any events that get added to the contracts. And in honor of National Joke Day, we did have that ABI version conflict thing come up as Travis was trying to test. And so he's saying, I'm not getting any events. And I'm saying, well, all of my tests are passing. So there must be something else wrong in the network. And this is shout out to I Am Developer, which is an absolutely amazing Twitter account. If you guys are on Twitter and want to follow some great jokes, this guy is hilarious. So that's about it. I don't any questions along with that?
For the sake of the fact that we're going to write a monthly dev update pretty soon, how would you describe this feature to somebody who's a non-developer? Like, what does the service listener is used for, and like, what's its main utility and value proposition, so to speak?
Sure. The service listener is designed to essentially provide a centralized cache of what's going on in the contract ecosystem. So you could certainly go out to the Rinkeby node or the main node whenever you wanted to and ask for all this information using Market.js and get the metadata and kind of pull that in live. But that is going to require that you're connected to the node, that your node is running is much more complicated architecture. So if you're running a reporting service or you're running the dApp and you want to be returning a lot of information about a lot of contracts very, very quickly, you're going to want to cache that information somewhere. And that's where I know we're all working in Web3 land, but Web2 is really good at that type of stuff. So that's what happens there. And that's why service listener.
Great. Thanks.
Certainly.
Sorry, just to give you like the exact pain point that caused us to go down this path is that previously when we had a lot of contracts in the whitelist, it would take a very long time for that Explorer view in the dApp to load, like almost minutes. And so now with the service listener, instead of hitting the whitelist contract and iterating through all those and generating this Explorer on everyone's local machine, we're doing that as they're being whitelisted and saving it in a database. So it'd be a much nicer user experience to load that up using the service listener and then a database that has that information stored in a centralized fashion, but you can still go ahead and verify if need be that that's coming directly from the blockchain. But it does provide a much better UX.
Yeah, and kind of standard disclaimer on the back of that is the API is not the canonical source. The blockchain is the canonical source. So you would never want to use this for anything that's critical or any decision that you're going to make on a specific contract. You would only want to use it for list views and things of that nature that, the impact of out-of-date information is not going to be quite as large. The other thing I wanted to mention, I know I'm sorry, I forget who it was, but someone was talking about looking at the pricing mechanisms and things like that. And one thing I did notice as I was developing on this is when the Gwei price was up at 61 last week during all the market shenanigans, and I went to deploy a contract at fast speed, it was costing somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 to do that. So that might be something that we want to look at a little bit further as well, and something I just wanted to note. So that is that's it for my demo, unless anyone has any other questions.